She walked into his empire carrying a mop and a secret, and the moment Han Sung-joon looked up from the body his men were cleaning off his marble floor, something cracked open inside his chest that he had spent 34 years keeping sealed shut. He was the most feared man in Seoul. He had never flinched at a gun, never trembled at a threat, never lost a single night of sleep over the blood on his hands. But this woman, this warm, full-figured woman standing in the doorway of his underground throne room with fire in her dark eyes and absolutely no fear on her face, looked at the chaos around her and said, with the calm of someone who had already survived worse things than him, "Should I come back, or are you almost done?" Something inside Han Sung-joon broke in that moment. Something he would spend the next several months trying desperately to ignore. Welcome, fam. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Her name was Sana. Sana Osei. 27 years old, Lagos-born, Seoul surviving, and the kind of beautiful that didn't announce itself loudly, but settled into a room the way heat settles into cold bones. She had arrived in South Korea on a work visa 18 months ago, taken every job available, and ended up on the cleaning roster at the CO building, which was what the city's legitimate directories called the 17-story glass structure in Gangnam that housed the headquarters of Han Enterprises. What the directories did not mention was the floor below the basement. What the directories could not explain was why the elevator required a blood scan after midnight. What nobody in the city spoke about openly was that the man who owned that building also owned half the city's underground economy, a network of protection operations, underground trade routes, and enough loyal soldiers to make the government politely look the other way. Han Sung-joon had been cleaning up a situation that night. That was how his lieutenant Dojin described it. A situation. 3 men from a rival syndicate had gotten ambitious and walked into a building that belonged to Sung-joon's territory without an invitation. It had been handled, as things in his world were always handled. Efficiently. Finally. Without mercy. His men were wrapping up when the service elevator opened, and Sana walked out with her cart, headphones around her neck, schedule in hand, completely unaware that she had just descended into the most dangerous square footage in the country. She saw everything. She registered it. And then she looked at Sung-joon directly, who was standing in the center of it all in a charcoal suit with his sleeves rolled up and the cold eyes of a man who had long stopped apologizing for what he was, and she said those words. "Should I come back, or are you almost done?" Sung-joon stared at her for 3 full seconds. His men did not breathe. "Who are you?" he asked. "Cleaning staff," she said. "3rd floor usually, but Minsu called in sick tonight, so I got the whole building. I can start somewhere else if you need more time down here." She was not shaking. That was the part that reached into his chest and refused to let go. Every person who had ever stood in that room when it looked the way it looked tonight had trembled. Even his own men, hardened and loyal, had a particular quality to their silence in these moments that spoke of the fear they were trained to suppress. This woman was not suppressing anything. She was simply waiting, weight on one hip, chin slightly raised, as if she had somewhere else to be, and was giving him the courtesy of deciding the schedule. "Go to the 4th floor," he said. "Come back here in an hour." "Noted," Sana said. And she pressed the elevator button. That was the night Han Sung-joon began watching her. Not because he had decided to. Because something in his body made the decision independently of his mind, and his mind, which had been running this empire for a decade without deviation, found itself unusually unable to override it. The next morning, he pulled her file. Standard background check. No criminal record. No outstanding debts. Emergency contact listed as an aunt in Accra. Previous employment included a hospital in Lagos, 2 years as a home caregiver in London, a stint at a hotel in Dubai. She had moved countries 4 times. She spoke 3 languages. She had a nursing certificate she hadn't finished converting to Korean credentials yet, which was the reason she was cleaning floors instead of working in a clinic. Sung-joon set the file down. He picked it up again. He read the nursing detail twice. He told himself this was standard procedure. He had files on all permanent building staff. This was nothing unusual. Then he asked Dojin to have a quiet word with the building's staffing manager about ensuring Sana's schedule included the 4th floor permanently, since it was the floor that required the most discretion, and discretion was a quality he valued above almost everything. Dojin gave him a very specific kind of look. The kind that said he had noticed something but valued his continued employment too much to comment. Done, Dojin said simply. A week passed. Sung-joon began working later than usual. He had always been a night person, the kind of man whose mind sharpened after midnight when the city quieted and the weight of the world thinned to a manageable pressure. But now his late hours had a particular gravitational pull toward the fourth-floor corridor, where a woman with dark skin and deep eyes would be cleaning the conference rooms with her headphones on, swaying slightly to music he couldn't hear, completely unbothered by the fact that she worked for a man whose name made other men cross the street. He watched her for 3 nights before she caught him. She turned from the window she was wiping, saw him in the doorway, and did not startle. She pulled one headphone off her ear and looked at him steadily. You do this often? She asked. Stand in doorways staring at employees? No, he said. Okay then. She turned back to the window. He should have walked away. He had business. He always had business. The Empire did not pause because a woman in a green cleaning uniform had decided to be magnificently unimpressed by him. You're not afraid of me, he said. She did not turn around. Should I be? Most people are. Now she turned, and the look she gave him was something between amusement and assessment, and it did something to his pulse that he filed immediately under things that would never be discussed aloud. I've worked in hospitals, Mr. Han. I've held people's hands while they died. I've sat with grief that had no words. I've watched suffering that your money couldn't fix. She tilted her head slightly. You're powerful. I understand that. But powerful doesn't automatically translate to frightening to me. Those are 2 different things. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a room shifts on its axis. Sana, he said. He had read the name in her file, but hearing himself say it aloud felt like something he hadn't planned. Yes, she said. Get back to work. She put her headphone on and turned back to the window. Han Sung-joon walked back to his office, sat down behind his desk, and stared at the wall for 4 minutes before his phone rang and pulled him back into the business of being the man that the city feared. A few days later, the building's kitchen was being renovated, which meant the staff broke room on the 4th floor had no hot water and no working appliances, and Sung-joon arrived at the building at 11:30 to find Sana sitting in the corridor outside the conference room eating what appeared to be cold rice from a container, back against the wall, legs stretched out, reading something on her phone. She looked completely at home on the floor of his empire's nerve center. Why are you sitting in the hallway? He asked. Nowhere else to eat. Kitchen's down. She lifted the container slightly. Cold rice is fine. I've had worse. He looked at her for a moment. Come, he said. She looked up. My office, he added, in a tone that he was aware sounded less like an invitation and more like a decree, which was the only tone he had ever learned to use with anyone. I'm fine here, she said pleasantly. Something flickered in his jaw. There's a kitchen attached to my office. Hot water. Actual food. She considered this with the gravity of someone weighing options, which he found both slightly maddening and entirely fascinating. Okay, she said finally and stood up. His office kitchen was stocked by a private chef who came in 3 times a week. There was leftover galbi and rice and enough banchan to cover the entire counter. Sana stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it all with an expression he couldn't read. Then she looked at him. You eat like this every night? When I eat, he said, which was not always guaranteed. She heated herself a plate without asking permission, which he found either disrespectful or refreshing depending on which part of him was answering the question, and sat at the small kitchen table and ate. He stood against the counter and watched her because he had apparently developed a habit of this that he had not yet addressed internally. Sit down, she said without looking up. You're making the room feel tense. He sat down, across from her, at the small kitchen table in his own building at nearly midnight, eating leftover galbi across from a cleaning staff employee who had just given him a seating instruction. I can make you hard, she said. He went completely still. She looked up from her plate and met his eyes with the same steady gaze she always had, and then she said, boiled eggs. The water takes about 8 minutes. I noticed the carton in the fridge. You look like someone who doesn't eat enough protein. She tilted her head. What did you think I meant? The silence stretched thin and charged between them. Han Sung-joon, who had faced down rival syndicates, survived 2 assassination attempts, and negotiated with men who had made governments kneel, felt something rise in his chest that could most accurately be described as heat, and said nothing for 3 full seconds. "Boiled eggs," he repeated. 8 minutes, she confirmed, and went back to her food. He stood up, filled the pot, and put it on the stove because apparently that was the version of himself he was now living in. That night, sitting in his kitchen eating food he had not cooked, listening to a woman explain to him with brisk practicality that he needed to eat before 2 in the morning because his cortisol levels were clearly already working overtime, Han Sung-joon had a thought he immediately categorized as dangerous. He wanted her to come back tomorrow. Not to clean. Not for work. Just to be in the room. He ignored the thought. He was good at ignoring things. The thought did not cooperate. Later that night, after she had gone, Dojin found him standing at the window of his office, looking down at the building's side entrance, where she had exited, her green uniform bag over one shoulder, earphones in, walking to the subway with the particular ease of someone who had made peace with carrying a lot. "Boss," Dojin said carefully. "Get me a full breakdown of the building's staff housing situation," Sung-joon said. "Anyone taking public transit after midnight deserves better security arrangements." Dojin stood very still. "All staff." Sung-joon's jaw moved. "Yes." "Of course," Dojin said, in the tone of a man who knew exactly which single employee this conversation was actually about. "I'll get right on that." Sung-joon said nothing. He watched until she disappeared around the corner, and then he turned back to his desk, opened the file for his meeting with the Busan delegation, and told himself firmly and finally that this was done. Over. He had noticed something. He had noted it. He was moving on. 3 days later, he quietly had a car assigned for her late-night commute home. He did not tell her it was him. He told the building manager it was a new company security policy. The building manager nodded and asked no questions because that was the culture of the CO building. You did not ask Han Sung-joon to explain himself. The sun did not explain the sky. Sana found out anyway. She always found out things. It was one of the qualities he was finding increasingly difficult to categorize under a neat professional label. She came to his office the following Tuesday evening, knocked twice, and walked in. He was in the middle of a phone call with someone who was actively trying to renegotiate a deal they had no leverage to renegotiate, and he looked up at her with the particular focused intensity that was his default expression and held up one finger. She sat down across from his desk and waited. He ended the call faster than he normally would have. He set the phone down. He looked at her. "The car," she said. "It's from you." "It's a company policy," he said. "Mr. Han," she said. "I'm a cleaning employee. The company policy has never involved private sedans. Minsu takes the bus at 2 in the morning every Wednesday and nobody has arranged him a vehicle." He said nothing. She looked at him steadily. There was no accusation in her face. No fear. No flutter of the kind he had seen in other people who sat across from this desk and wanted things from him. She was simply looking at him with those clear eyes, waiting for honesty. "It's a safety concern," he said finally. "For me specifically." A beat. For staff working late hours in this building specifically. She tilted her head very slightly. The edge of something moved across her mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement of a thing that was true, but that neither of them had named yet. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." She stood up. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. Without turning around, she said, "You should eat before midnight tonight. I left something in the kitchen fridge. It just needs to be heated." She left. Han Sung-joon sat at his desk for a long time. He did not move. He did not pick up the phone. He just sat with the particular quality of silence that a room holds after someone has left it and taken more warmth with them than they had any business possessing. Then he went to the kitchen and ate whatever she had left. It was jollof rice. The smell of it hit him before he opened the container. Rich, warm, deep with tomato and spice, the kind of food that does not leave your memory. He ate every single bite standing at the counter alone at midnight, and something about it made the back of his throat tighten in a way that he had no professional vocabulary for. This was the beginning. Not of something casual. Not of something that could be managed or contained or filed under controlled variables. This was the beginning of the thing that would remake him entirely. He just did not know it yet. The weeks that followed had a particular texture to them. Sung-joon had run empires. He had managed complex networks of loyalty, violence, diplomacy, and fear with the precision of someone who had been trained since adolescence to treat emotion as a liability. He knew how to want something strategically. He knew how to pursue an objective without revealing it. What he did not know, what nobody had ever prepared him for, was how to want something that looked at him like he was ordinary. Like he was simply a man who needed to eat dinner before midnight and get more sleep. Like the weight of what he was had no particular claim on the air between them. Sanaa treated him with a kind of comfortable straightforwardness that felt almost violent in its novelty. She argued about the building's ventilation system with the facility manager and then drafted a 3-page recommendation and left it on the 4th floor kitchen table for someone to find. She rearranged the supply closet on the 4th floor twice because the original system made no physical sense. She brought different food almost every night, which she left in his kitchen fridge with small handwritten labels that said things like heat for 5 minutes and don't add salt. You clearly already use too much. He read these labels more carefully than he read most intelligence reports. His men noticed. Of course they noticed. Dojin noticed first. Then Ryuho, his head of security, who mentioned very carefully one morning that he had observed the cleaning schedule had been adjusted so that the 4th floor was always done late, around the same hours the boss worked. Sung-joon looked at him with the expression he used for things that were not to be discussed further, and Ryuho stopped speaking mid-sentence and developed a sudden deep interest in his own shoes. What none of them said, what all of them understood, was that Han Sung-joon was behaving in ways that had no historical precedent. He had never dated anyone connected to his building. He had never maintained any kind of long-term personal relationship at all, in the conventional sense. There had been arrangements, brief and contained and always structured with clear boundaries. There had never been jollof rice in his kitchen fridge. There had never been handwritten labels with instructions about his sodium intake. 3 weeks in, the thing he had been ignoring arrived wearing someone else's face. His name was Park Hyun-woo. 29, new to the building's overnight security rotation, recruited from an external firm. He was tall in the way that attracted attention without trying, easygoing, the kind of person who filled a room with comfortable warmth rather than voltage. Sung-joon had reviewed his background check. Clean record. Good references. No reason to find him interesting. He found him interesting. He found him interesting specifically because on a Wednesday night, crossing from the elevator bank to his office, he heard laughter from the 4th floor kitchen. 2 voices. Sanaa's first, low and rich and genuine, the laugh of someone who had been caught off guard by actual delight. And then a man's voice, easy and warm, saying something in Korean that made her laugh again. Sung-joon stopped walking. He stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than he had ever stood still in a corridor without purpose. He turned and walked to the kitchen. Park Hyun-woo was leaning against the counter with a cup of instant coffee, talking to Sanaa, who was sitting at the table with her notebook open, clearly having taken a break. They both looked up when Sung-joon appeared in the doorway. Hyun-woo straightened immediately. "Mr. Han, I was just on your rounds?" Sung-joon said. The words were completely level. The tone was something else. "Yes, sir. I was passing and security rounds do not include the kitchen." Sung-joon's eyes moved to Sanaa briefly, then back to Hyun-woo. "Continue your rounds." Hyun-woo left quickly. He was not a stupid man. Sung-joon stood in the kitchen doorway. Sanaa was looking at him. Not with the wariness that most people displayed after they had just witnessed him dismantle someone's evening with 12 words. She was looking at him with something more precise than that. Something that saw more than he was comfortable with. "He was just talking," she said. "I know. Then why did you look at him like that?" "Like what?" She set her pen down. "Like he had taken something that belonged to you." The silence between them was different from the others. It had weight and temperature and a particular direction. Sung-joon stood at the edge of it and felt it with his entire body. "Get back to work," he said. He walked out. He went back to his office. He sat down. He told himself this was nothing. He was a man who ran an empire. He did not experience jealousy. Jealousy was a luxury available to people who admitted they wanted things. He did not admit he wanted things. He simply acquired what was necessary and maintained what was valuable. This woman was an employee, a notable employee, unusual, interesting, but an employee. He picked up his phone and called Dojin. Run a deeper background check on Park Hyun-woo, he said. The new security rotation guy? Yes. Any specific concern?
No.
Dojin was quiet for a moment. I'll have it to you by morning. Tonight, Sung-joon said. Tonight, Dojin confirmed, without a single note of surprise. The report came back clean. Park Hyun-woo was exactly who he appeared to be. Sung-joon read it at 1 a.m. and felt no particular relief, which told him more about himself than the report told him about Hyun-woo. The following night, Sana came to his office without being asked, which was something she had started doing with an informality that should have bothered him. She knocked, entered, set a thermos of something hot on his desk, and sat down across from him. You should know, she said, that I noticed you had him reassigned to the first floor. Sung-joon did not look up from the document he was reviewing. The first floor rotation needed reinforcement. She pulled her notebook from her bag and opened it, clearly intending to sit there and work on whatever she worked on in notebooks while he did whatever he was doing, which was apparently now a thing they did together in the evenings. I have a question. Yes. Why do you make it so complicated? He looked up. She was writing something in her notebook, not looking at him. Explain what you mean, he said. You do things, she said, still writing. The car. The kitchen. Staying late. The way you look at me when you think I can't see you. And then the moment something gets close to honest, you go cold and give orders and remind everyone of the hierarchy. She turned a page. It's complicated for no reason. The room felt smaller. He set the document down. You're very direct. I grew up in a house where nobody said what they meant, and everyone was miserable, she said. I decided a long time ago that being direct costs less energy than being strategic about feelings. He looked at her for a long moment. She kept writing. He wondered sometimes if she knew what she did to the air in a room. Probably she did. She was not a person who missed things. Sana, he said. She looked up. I don't have vocabulary for this. He said it very carefully, the way he said things he had thought about but not rehearsed. I have vocabulary for the empire. For negotiation. For what happens when people cross me. I don't have the other kind. She looked at him with those steady eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, That's the most honest thing you've said to me. I'm aware. It's a good start, she said, and went back to her notebook. That night, he did not leave the office until 2 a.m, and she was there until he told her to go home, and the drive home in the car he had assigned felt different from the previous nights. Heavier. Warmer. Like something that had been circling had finally entered the atmosphere, and both of them had decided, separately and without discussing it, to stop pretending it wasn't there. He was not prepared for what the next week brought. He would not have been prepared even if someone had told him directly, because nothing in the life he had built had given him the tools for it. A man named Shim Tae-kwon arrived at the CO building on a Friday afternoon. He was 41, inherited wealth, old family connections, the kind of man who moved through rooms believing the room had been designed for him. He was also one of 3 investors Sung-joon was in negotiations with for a significant expansion of his legitimate port logistics operation. He was a necessary inconvenience. Sung-joon tolerated him with the professional grace of a man who had learned to separate personal feeling from strategic behavior. Shim Tae-kwon ran into Sana in the 4th floor corridor at 6 p.m. Sung-joon heard about it 4 minutes later from Ryuho, who had the particular expression of a man delivering news that was true but uncomfortable. He spoke to her, Ryuho said. He asked who she was. She said she worked in the building. He said she was far too beautiful to be cleaning offices and offered to have his assistant send her information about a job at his company. Sung-joon set down his coffee. She politely declined. Ryuho continued. She told him she was happy where she was. He gave her his card and told her to think about it. Ryuho paused. He touched her hand when he gave her the card. The silence that followed in Sung-joon's office had a very specific quality. The kind that happened just before something changed permanently. Where is he now? Sung-joon said. It was not a question. Waiting room, Ryuho said. For your 6:30. Sung-joon nodded. He stood up. He adjusted his jacket. He was perfectly composed. Anyone looking at him would have seen a man preparing for a routine business meeting. They would not have seen the particular stillness that settled in him when something moved close to what was his. He walked into the waiting room. Shim Taegwon stood and smiled with the ease of a man who had never truly been afraid of anything in his life. Sung-jun, ready for us? There's been a change, Sung-jun said pleasantly. We'll be moving the expansion partnership to a different investor. My team will reach out to yours with the formal notification. Shim Taegwon blinked. I beg your what? You're no longer the right fit, Sung-jun said. He was still perfectly pleasant. Thank you for your time. Dojin will see you out. Dojin materialized from somewhere with the efficiency of long practice and guided a stunned Shim Taegwon toward the elevator. Sung-jun turned and walked back to his office. He sat down. He stared at his desk. This was not controlled behavior. He knew that. He had removed a viable business partner from a significant deal because the man had touched Sana's hand while giving her a business card. This was not the action of a man who had everything in hand. Later that evening, when she came up to the 4th floor and found him in the corridor, she looked at him with the expression she wore when she was computing something. I heard the meeting was cancelled, she said. Rescheduled, he said. She looked at him. He looked at the wall. You're doing it again, she said softly. Doing what? Not saying what's true. She stepped slightly closer. Not in a way that was dramatic. In the way of someone who had decided to close a distance that had been maintained too long. He was just a man who gave me a card. I know, Sung-jun said. Then why does it look like you want to dismantle the entire meeting? He turned his head and looked at her. Directly. The way he hadn't allowed himself to do completely, with nothing arranged in his expression, nothing managed or curated, just the unguarded version of what had been building in him since the night she walked into his underground room with a mop and not a single gram of fear. Because he touched her hand, he said quietly. Sana was still. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were doing that thing where they saw too much and didn't look away from what they found. Han Sung-jun, she said slowly. Yes. Are you jealous? The word sat between them. He did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer. This is complicated, he said finally, because of what I am, what I run. The people who want me dead, who would use anyone close to me as a way to get to me. You understand that? I understand it, she said. That doesn't answer what I asked. He exhaled once, very slowly. Yes, he said. It was the smallest word he had ever said in this building, and it cost him more than any deal he had ever closed. Yes, I am. Sana looked at him for 3 more seconds, and then she said, quietly and without ceremony, Okay. Okay, he repeated. Okay, she said again, and something shifted in her eyes. Not relief. Something steadier than that. Like a decision landing. So now what do we do with that? Han Sung-jun, who had an answer for everything, stood in the corridor of his own empire with no script and said, I don't know. It was the second honest thing he had said to her. And it felt like the most significant victory of his life. The danger arrived, as it always did in Sung-jun's world, without warning and without mercy. It came on a Tuesday in the form of a message left on the 4th floor in a white envelope with Sana's name written on the outside in a hand that did not belong to any of his staff. Ryuho brought it to him unopened at 11 at night because Ryuho understood which things to bring directly and which to handle independently, and this was firmly in the first category. Inside was a photograph. Sana, taken from a distance, walking to the subway. Taken approximately 3 weeks ago based on the coat she was wearing, before he had arranged the car. Beneath the photograph were words in Korean. We know what matters. Sung-jun held the photograph for a long time. He looked at it with a particular quality of stillness that was not calm, but was discipline applied over fury. Then he set it on his desk, picked up his phone, and called 3 people in sequence. By the time the 3rd call ended, 7 men were already moving through the city, doing the work he required them to do. By morning, he would know who had been in his building, how they had gotten through security without triggering the system, and who had sent them. What he knew now, in this moment, was that someone had found the thing he had been trying not to have and had immediately recognized its value as a weapon. He told her the next morning. He had considered not telling her, which was what he would have done with anyone else, managing the information and the response without the complication of an emotional conversation. But Sana was not anyone else, and he had made a decision, when he told her he was jealous in that corridor, that whatever this was between them would not be built on the same foundations as everything else he had built. Those foundations were efficient but cold, and they required the other person to be reduced. She would not be reduced. Not by him. Not by anyone. She sat across from him at the small kitchen table. He set the photograph in front of her. She looked at it, her fingers pressed flat against the table. She did not speak for a moment. "How long?" she said finally. "The photograph was taken about 3 weeks ago, before the car." He paused. "Which is why the car was not a security policy, to be clear." She looked up. He met her eyes. "I know," she said quietly. "I knew then." She looked back at the photograph. "Who are they?" "I'm finding out. I have people working on it." He leaned slightly forward. "Sana, I need you to know 2 things. First, whoever sent this did it specifically because they have concluded that you are significant to me. They're not wrong. Second, I will remove every single threat before it gets within 100 meters of you. I will do this not because you asked me to, but because that is what I have already decided." She looked at him across the table. He watched her process this, the danger, the admission inside the danger, the way he had wrapped them together because he was not a man who had ever learned to separate the two cleanly. "You're saying being close to you puts me in danger," she said. "Yes. And you're also saying you're not going to let anything happen to me." "Yes. And you're saying this is because I matter to you." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I am saying all 3 of those things at the same time. I am aware of the contradiction." She let out a long breath. "Sung-Jun," she said, and the use of his name, without the formal address, was something she had started doing recently, and each time it reached into him, like a hand through glass. "I grew up in a world where I had to be invisible to be safe. Keep quiet, don't take up space, don't attract attention. I spent my first year in this country trying to be small enough that nothing bad could find me." She looked at the photograph. "And I ended up here, at the center of something enormous, visible to people who have never met me." She looked back at him. "I'm not running." The quiet that came after that was different from all the other quiets. It had a different texture entirely. He stood up from the table and walked around to her side, and she turned her chair, and he crouched in front of her and looked at her the way he had not let himself look yet, without any of the armor on, just the man inside all of it. "I have never brought anyone into my world by choice," he said. "I have people I protect out of loyalty and obligation. I have never wanted to protect someone because the idea of them being hurt was personally unbearable to me." His jaw moved. "I need you to understand that what I'm telling you is not a strategy. It is not management. I don't have vocabulary for it the way I told you. But it is the truest thing I have said in years." Sana looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand against his face. Her palm was warm against his jaw, and the contact was simple and devastating, and nothing in his entire life had prepared him for the way his eyes briefly closed, involuntarily, completely, at being touched by someone who had not calculated the touch first. "Okay," she said softly. "Then I need you to know that I've been trying to be sensible about you for 2 months, and it has not worked at all." Something moved through his chest. He turned his head slightly into her palm. "Good," he said, which was not the eloquent declaration his vocabulary should have been capable of, but it was honest, and honest was the thing between them. He stood up. He pulled her gently to her feet, and they stood in the small kitchen of his empire in the middle of the night, and he looked at her for one more moment, and then he kissed her, slowly and carefully, the way of a man who understood that this was not just a kiss. This was a declaration. This was him choosing something he had never chosen before. She kissed him back, and the warmth of her was incredible, steady and real and present in a way that nothing else in his life was. The night folded itself around them, and the city outside continued its indifferent rotation, and nothing exploded or shattered, and the world did not end. It simply began something new. The morning after, it was Dojin who brought him the intelligence report. The photograph and the message had originated from a man named Jin Soo-hyun, a mid-level operator who worked for the Cheon Network, a syndicate that had been quietly building territory in 3 districts that Sung-Jun had historically controlled without challenge. Jin Soo-hyun was not the architect. He was the messenger for someone higher, someone who had been watching Sung-Jun for 8 months and had identified the shift in his behavior as a potential opening. "They think she's a weakness," Dojin said. They've made an error in their analysis, Sung-Jun said calmly. Do you want me to arrange? I'll handle the Cheon network myself, Sung-Jun said. But first, I need her somewhere safe. The conversation with Sana was not as simple as he would have liked. She was not a woman who accepted being relocated and secured without wanting to understand every aspect of why. She asked questions. She required answers that were honest, not managed. He gave them to her because that was the agreement they now had, even though it was an agreement neither of them had spoken explicitly. She understood after 20 minutes. She did not like it. She agreed to stay at one of his secured residences for the duration, a clean apartment in a building he owned in Yongsan where the security was invisible and complete. She packed one bag. She paused at his car. She looked at him. You'll be careful, she said. Always, he said. That's not an answer, she said. That's a deflection. He looked at her for a moment. I will come back, he said. I give you my word. She nodded. She got in the car. He stood on the street and watched the car go. Then he turned and did what Han Sung-Jun did when someone reached into his world and touched what was his. He was comprehensive. He was methodical. He was the thing the city had built a very careful mythology around, the man who had never lost a war on his own territory because he did not fight defensively. He fought from 3 moves ahead. The Cheon network found this out over 72 hours that Sung-Jun did not sleep through, and at the end of those 72 hours their operation in his 3 districts was not a negotiation problem anymore. It was a historical footnote. He went to the apartment in Yongsan at 4 in the morning, still wearing the same clothes, exhausted in the particular way that comes from sustained intensity rather than just physical demand. He knocked. He heard her voice ask who it was. He said his name. The door opened. She looked at him for 1 second, taking in the exhaustion and the state of him, and then she stepped back and let him in. She did not say anything for a moment. She went to the kitchen. She made him eat. She sat across from him and watched him eat with an expression that was tender and exasperated and deeply present, and it occurred to him that in his entire adult life, no one had ever simply watched him eat as if his eating was something worth witnessing. It's over, he said. Are you sure? Yes. She nodded. She collected the dishes. He reached out and caught her wrist gently as she passed, and she stopped and looked at him. I meant what I said, he told her. Before. This is not strategy. You are not a managed variable. You are the thing that is real in a life that has mostly been architecture. Sana looked at him for a long moment in the kitchen light. Then she said, I know, Sung-Jun. I know. She turned her hand and held his properly, fingers wrapped around his fingers. I do too. In case you needed to hear it said directly. He did need to hear it. He would not admit that, but she knew it, the way she knew most things about him now, with a clarity that had stopped feeling threatening and had started feeling like something he could not remember his life without. The months that came after were not without difficulty. Nothing in his world was ever permanently peaceful. There were other threats, other tests, smaller and larger in turn. There were moments where the weight of what he was pressed down on what they were trying to build, and she had to decide again whether the equation was worth it. She always decided it was. Not passively, not because she was swept away, but because she had looked at everything clearly and chosen with her eyes open, which was the only kind of choosing she had ever known how to do. He changed in ways that his men noticed and quietly marveled at. He ate regularly. He slept. He was no less formidable, but there was a particular edge to his coldness that softened in the corners, that gave way occasionally to something that looked remarkably like a person rather than just a position. He learned, slowly and with genuine effort, to say things plainly, to reach across the distance instead of constructing an architecture around the want and calling it something else. She got her nursing credentials converted. She stopped working as cleaning staff at the CO building, which she announced to him one evening with the straightforward simplicity of someone who had made a decision and did not require approval for it. I have an interview at Asen Medical Center, she told him. I'd like to go back to nursing. That's what I actually am. Yes, he said immediately. She looked slightly surprised at the immediacy. You're not going to say anything about security or proximity or... No, he said. You told me once that you held people's hands while they died. That you understood grief that money couldn't fix. He met her eyes. That is who you are. Go be who you are. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression that he had catalogued carefully over their months together and identified as the one she wore when he said something that reached her in a place she hadn't prepared. Then she crossed the room and held his face in her hands and kissed him with the full warmth of everything she was, and he held her the way a man holds something that has rearranged his entire interior world. She got the job. She was exceptional at it. Her colleagues loved her. He knew this because he did not surveil her. He simply listened when she talked, and she talked about her patience with the passion of someone doing the exact thing they were meant to do and had been kept from for too long. He proposed to her 6 months later. He did not do it elaborately, because he had learned by then that she found elaborate gestures slightly suspicious, as if scale was being used to compensate for something. He did it in the kitchen of his apartment after dinner, the same small kitchen table where it had all truly started, and he sat across from her with a ring his mother had left him, old gold, deep-set stone, the kind of jewelry that carries history, and he set it on the table between them and said, "I want to keep doing this. With you. Permanently." She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "That's a proposal?" "Yes." "Han Sung-joon," she said, and the way she said his name had evolved over the months into something that contained entire volumes. "You could have just asked, 'Will you marry me?'" he said. "Yes," she said, without the pause, without the theatrical weighing of options. Just yes, clear and present and completely real. He put the ring on her finger, and she looked at it on her hand with an expression that she did not compose or arrange, just let sit on her face openly, which was one of the things about her that had broken him open from the very beginning. She felt things and did not make them smaller to be easier to look at. He pulled her into his arms and held her, and felt the specific weight of her against him, and thought about the night. She walked into his underground room with a mop, and said, "Should I come back, or are you almost done?" He thought about how he had stared at her for 3 full seconds and felt something crack open. He thought about all the ways he had tried to close that crack, and all the ways it had refused. He had built empires. He had made men afraid. He had survived things that should have destroyed him. And the bravest thing he had ever done was sit across from a woman at a small kitchen table and say, "I don't have vocabulary for this." The wedding was quiet. Her aunt flew in from Accra. His inner circle attended. Dojin cried, which he denied loudly for months afterward. There were flowers she had chosen herself, warm colors, full and uncontained. There was food she had made in partnership with his kitchen, the 2 flavors of their worlds on the same table. She walked to him in a dress the color of deep amber, and the way he looked at her when she came down the aisle was a thing his men discussed in whispers for a long time afterward. Not because it was unexpected from a man in love, but because Han Sung-joon, who had never in living memory looked anything other than composed, looked at her like a man who had been handed back something he had given up on finding. She stopped in front of him. She looked up at him with those clear eyes. "Still not afraid of you," she said quietly. "I know," he said, and the way he smiled, slow and unguarded and completely his own, was the smile of a man who had learned, finally, what the alternative to fear was. 9 months later, in the hospital where she worked, Sana delivered their daughter just before dawn on a morning when the sky over Seoul was the exact color of warm amber. Sung-joon held his daughter with the focused intensity of a man who had never held anything so fragile in his hands and was terrified of the specific tenderness this produced in him. She was small and furious and perfect. She had Sana's eyes, already and immediately demanding to see everything. Sana watched him from the bed, tired and radiant and completely present. "She's going to run your life," Sana said. "Yes," Sung-joon said, without any hesitation, looking at his daughter. "I hope you're prepared."